All right. So how's it going? How are you doing?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Excellent. I just got back from Colorado and I'm still a little tired though. I don't know why. I don't think I
Must
didn't.
be the time zone change, right? It's all that jet lag.
Oh man, it's weird. I think man, I don't know if I got enough. I got 6.5 hours sleep and I think that was enough, but I don't know. Maybe I need more. So the purpose really is just to get to know who you are as you as an individual and your organization in which you work for. So I went off the questions that I sent you. So I can just go right off of that. I think I could share them with you too. Um, you want me to send them to you or do you have?
No, I have them. Yeah,
Oh,
because you
okay.
sent them earlier.
Yeah. So I guess we can start off. Um, you know, I'll get started right now. My name is Jesse. I'm with ROI Safety Services. The purpose is to get to know OSHA, Cal OSHA in particular. And I think you have another acronym, DOSH or DOSH, whatever pronunciation is correct. I'm not sure, but you're basically known to the world outside of in the US as OSHA. And typically you being OSHA has not a positive outlook for most businesses, but we're trying to change that frame of reference, at least from what I have seen from you. For sure you guys want to help people. There's no doubt about that. Um, but you, Tara, we want to get to know you and what you do and how you got into working for OSHA and the different roles you have had in the past. How many years?
Oh, more than 17. So I'm approaching, yeah, over 17.
Wow,
Yeah.
you are definitely a veteran of OSHA and industry because you've probably seen a lot of different types of industry. So the the purpose really is just to get to know who you are and what is it like to be Tara and working for OSHA and how you experience that. So can you tell us a little bit about your role, your current role, maybe your history in terms of where growing up in California or your educational experience and that sort of thing, um, would be a good start, and then we can start digging into some specific questions of your job.
Yeah, definitely. So, as I've stated earlier, I've been with Kalosha for over 17 years now. So over 7 years in consultation. And then prior to that, I spent 10 years in enforcement. And
Mm,
then prior to that, I was in the private sector for, I don't know, 5 years in the hazardous waste industry. And then I went to school at Humboldt State. I'm actually originally from Washington, but came down to go to Humboldt State. And did not, health and safety definitely was not what my major was. I was a biology major, and like a lot of things, you get a job, and what you think you're going to go to college for, you don't end up doing. And
yeah.
so here I am.
Yeah, that's very common. At least you're not a bartender.
That's true. That's true. Well,
I'm
they
not
make
saying you're
good
bad
tips.
at that.
So
Yeah, we all have friends that are in their 40s still being a bartender. It's like, what happened? So, good. I'm glad that Humboldt State biology. So, well, biology has served you well though in OSHA. So, in on the industrial hygiene side of it, I guess. Has
yeah. So I came in. When I came into enforcement, they had the industrial hygienist side, and then they had the safety engineer side.
got
And
it.
so there were two different unions involved with that. And then the issue was is that safety engineers, because they had a better union, made more money than the industrial hygienists.
Oh
And
no.
so when Len Welsh was the chief, they just merged everybody. So the industrial hygienists got the better pay, but then they became safety engineers. So, but yeah, I'm first and foremost an industrial hygienist.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So, what are some of the most common hazards that you see the violations and that come across during an inspection during your enforcement years? I mean, what are some things that you see that you look for that maybe we can communicate to small businesses in particular that they can address?
Yeah, so actually, first, let me throw out my little disclaimer to make my employer happy and
Yeah,
to
for sure.
appease them. So, of course, these are all my own personal views,
Mhm.
personal opinions. I am in no way representing the division or the Department of Industrial Relations.
Mhm.
And anything I state here today may be inaccurate, although I try to be accurate. And when I don't know something, I just say I don't know it because I think honesty is important. So getting that out of the way, it really depends on the industry, right? Because
Mhm.
each industry, I think, will have kind of some different elements to it. But for the most part, it's I think written programs. That's probably the most common, like your injury and illness prevention program, right? I
Mhm.
think that citation will always be in the top 10 for whatever industry you're in.
Mhm.
So because it's a written program that all employers are required to have. You could have one part-time employee that only works 4 hours a week, and you technically need to have that written program.
Yeah, yeah.
And then as far as enforcement goes, enforcement, they come out, there's been a complaint, there's been an accident, whatever. But they're required to look at that written program. There's certain written programs that they're required to look at. So that's why that one's always on the table. So
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's I'm glad that you mentioned the IIPP because that really is in the way I understand and have applied it over the last 30 years in industry, is that's like the foundation, the umbrella of your compliance and safety programs, mostly your safety programs, but it really is sets the tone for what else lockout, tagout, HAZCOM, and all those other programs. And what one of the things that I see quite often is I'll ask a client, hey, can I see your IIPP? And they'll hand it to me. And it's like 3 inches thick. And they're
yeah,
like a small mom and pop company, like
yeah,
four employees. And I go, what in the world? And then I'll look through it and I'll say, workers' comp insurance. Not the customer name, but workers' comp, and so what do you do when you see stuff like that? Like clearly it's not an IIPP for them. It's somebody else's that they just got from their insurance company. Does that check the box for you, or is that something that you go, hey,
no, it's definitely a red flag. So,
yeah,
I think that what you mentioned earlier about the IIPP being an umbrella, right? Like that's correct. Everybody has to have that. And then based on employee exposure, that's when you pull in the other regulations, right? So if you have employees who use chemicals, hazard communications being pulled into. If you have employees that work outdoors, you have heat illness, right? So there's all these other written programs. So it
yeah,
ends up happening for a lot of employers because they're they're wearing like four different hats, right? Like your office manager is maybe answering the phones and doing payroll and accounts receivable, but also is in charge of human resources, and you know what, we're going to have you do health and safety too.
yep,
And so what they do is they reach out and they see online that they can buy OSHA compliance, right? Like you get this 400-300 page document and you're good to go. So when in enforcement and consultation, when I go out there and I see that, that's always a red flag, because it's always going to, I think what the employer does not understand is that they need to go through and then make that program theirs, right? They need to edit it. They need to make it specific to their operation. So if you don't have employees that work outdoors, don't have a heat illness prevention program in there. If you don't have employees who are using respirators, take out the respiratory protection section. Take out, if you don't have employees who use fall protection, take out that fall protection plan. But that's the hard part, because employees just they don't know, so they think more is good, where less is actually better.
yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with that. And this is such a common challenge that I see. Almost every we do gap analysis, we'll go in and we'll look at it and go, oh wow, this is not yours. And it's like, do you even know what's in there? And they'll look at me like my dog does in the morning when I, hey, you want to go for a run? And they're like, oh, ooh, they're confused, and they don't understand exactly. So yeah, I'm glad that you are definitely encouraging less is better. And that's
Yeah.
what we definitely want to see, and site specific for sure. So definitely IIPP and then all the other supporting programs is something
And
that you,
Jesse, if I could just interject real quick, because I just had a thought. So one thing else is, like, when you look at our regulations for like the written programs, a lot of times they're going to say that the employer must establish, implement, and maintain, right? So
yes.
that's a very like just kind of brief sentence for the written program they need to have. But those are actually three different citations, right? Because the employer may not have a program, right? So they never established it. or maybe they have the program like that they buy from the online service or whatever, and they've never implemented it, right? Or maybe they have a program and I'm looking through it, enforcement's looking through it, and it says, oh, it says here that Karen is your safety person. Oh no, Karen hasn't worked here for 2 years. They're not maintaining it. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing, is that there's actually 3 citations, the possibility of 3 citations in one, right? So there's 3 different things that we would be looking at.
And what would the potential citation be?
It would, it'd still just be 1 citation,
Mhm.
but there's just basically 3 ways to get that citation. So they may say the employer established a written IIPP, but it was not maintained
Mhm.
because of the following reasons, and they're going to list what those reasons are.
Wow. So really it's something so simple, but something so common that everybody overlooks and they think that they got it from their insurance. They must be okay.
Yeah.
That sense of we trust insurance companies and they know what's best for us. So we'll just take that. So and I see that I not only see that with safety programs, we see it with handbooks, employee handbooks.
Oh yeah.
We see it with sexual harassment training. There's very clear guidelines by Cal or the state about that training, and they get it from that website, and then knowingly that they trust that, but an HR professional time and time again says, no, it's not compliant. You can't rely on them to do that for you. So
Mhm.
site specific is key to everything really. You just can't buy something canned and expect it to be okay when you put it on the shelf. So that's good to know. So definitely we want to focus on programs. And once you go in there and you look at these programs, what are some other things that come up during a random inspection, let's say?
Like the walkthrough portion of it, you mean, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so again, it's just kind of industry based, but a lot of times, if there's like manufacturing, it's going to be like machine guarding issues, electrical issues that will come up. If they have forklifts that are battery powered, a lot of times in their battery charging area, do they have an eye wash? And they technically need to have an eye wash and a shower. And a lot of times they may have an eye wash, but they won't necessarily have that shower, right?
yeah.
Because that regulation is specific to the flushing of eyes and body. So there's ways to get around, I think, the shower aspect of it, but they always need to have an eye wash.
One of the things I've noticed lately, and I've been doing just recently a lot of HAZCOM training, and we've been
Mm-hmm.
pulling up clients' safety data sheets, and it says 15 minutes of constant flow
Mm-hmm.
for eyes. And really the only way to get a good 15-minute flow eye wash is to either have it piped in or have one of those really big units.
Yeah. So
What do you
with
recommend?
the eye wash thing, so what ends up happening a lot is that you'll have employees who will have like those. They think they're eye washes because they might be labeled eye wash, but they're like those personal squeeze bottles, right?
Yeah, those are
So
not
in our
perfect, man. Those
in
don't
our
give 15 minutes.
regulation, uh, it talks about that it has to meet this ANSI standard, right? The ANSI
Yeah,
standard for emergency eye washes. And then that standard basically says you have to do the 15 minutes of flushing at a flow rate of like 1.5 liters over 15 minutes.
yeah,
So either you need to have a plumb system or you need to have one of those self-contained, gravity-fed eye washes. And I think, what is that, like roughly like 7 gallons.
yeah,
So, but yeah, but for the safety data sheets, what the employer wants to look at is that under section 2, it will list the eye hazard. And so if they see like a category one means it's corrosive. You need to
mhm,
have an eye wash. If they see a category 2A that talks about it being severely irritating, you need to have an eye wash. And
mhm.
then the third category is a category 2B, which means it's mildly irritating. So they don't need to have an eye wash. So if they see a 1 or a 2A, they should have an eye wash.
Yeah, and if you have any type of battery or charging, you definitely need to have an eye wash.
Yeah,
Um,
there's that. Yeah, that regulation specifically says, yeah, the flushing of eyes and body. So
and and so this is something that I see quite often in labs and various other types of industry where they literally have those little bottles, at various places, and they think that, even in the construction business, we'll see that too when we know they're dealing with a toxic material,
mhm,
and they just have those little water bottles, and that's just not sufficient. Um,
no.
Well, that definitely is an area that we're seeing quite often as well. So, okay, well, what are some other common things that you see? I know the bench grinder is another one. A bench grinder,
Oh
that's
yeah,
also,
so the bench grinder is another one that we look at, right? Because there's a lot of different regulations for that, right? Making sure that your tool rest is within like an eighth of an inch to the actual wheel. You have
Mhm.
your tongue guard, quarter of an inch. So definitely the abrasive wheels. If they have forklifts, making sure that they're wearing the seat belts. If the forklift comes with the seat belt, then they need to be using that seat belt. That's a really easy citation for enforcement to issue. And that's a serious citation. That's like an $18,000 citation starting out. So that's something, with enforcement, they have different severities. So like a serious citation, that's going to be $18,000, and then it can get reduced, right? Based on like the number of, based on the size of the company, based on, the number, how often it's, if it's like just one forklift driver and everybody else has their seatbelts on, then maybe, the likelihood is going to be lower. But and then there's like the 50% abatement credit, but there's like a whole bunch of different things that come into play. A lot of times that $18,000 citation will get knocked down to a few $1,000s, but still that's a lot of money. So
Yeah. Yeah, I recently was working with a client that had some pretty deep pockets, and they did what they needed to do to fix it, and it just wasn't a big deal, right? They fixed it, they
mhm.
moved on. And then I had another client who they were fined up towards 70,000
Oh wow,
within
that's a lot
the
of money.
within the countertop industry,
Hmm.
and it was from silica and various other things, and they were fined that large amount. That was significant for them,
Oh,
and
I imagine, yeah, that's a lot of money.
it was horrible. I'm like, sorry, man. You must do these things. You must do air monitoring to find out even if, what you're still. They didn't even know anything about silica, yet, but yet that's their job was working
That's
with
their business,
granite
yeah.
and various other types of materials like that. So it was pretty devastating for them, and they definitely took it serious. They did everything they had to do, and it cost them all. It probably cost them roughly about the same as their citation, just implementing these programs.
Right.
They could have
Yeah.
easily have done it, you know, on their own at their own timeline and saved, well over 50% of
Yeah.
of that, well over. So it's frustrating when we have resources out there, which I know you guys have a lot of resources, but the small business doesn't, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So
Right.
getting that information to them is something I really, this is why I'm doing this. It's just getting the information out to them. Hey, most of our clients are, 50 or less employees, and they really don't know. They really
Yeah.
believe, hey, my IIPP I got from my insurance company is going to be fine. Doing forklift training, yeah, we're fine there. But do we need to do heat illness and IIPP training? Well, we did forklift training. That's
Right. Yeah.
and so it's those things that we really want to tackle with ROI, doing these interviews and just getting information to those who, so we can really save a life
Hmm.
and save money for these small businesses. So what else you got? I know we got bench grinders, seat belts, some other things that you kind of focus in on. I know I had a client who got nailed with a bunch of machine guarding uh,
Oh yeah.
on
Mhm.
equipment this equipment was so old. I think it was the original equipment that they installed in the 20s.
Oh
It was insane. It was so old.
yeah, we come across that a lot, especially like machinery from like the 50s, because it was made to last, right? And it has lasted, but the problem is, it's not guarded well, and there's a lot of hazards, right? So we have regulations that talk about like just moving parts, like the transmission parts, like belts and pulleys and chain and sprocket drives and rotating shafts, that those all need to be guarded within 7 feet of the working area, right? And
Yeah.
so most of the time it's just 7 feet from the floor. Um, but those are all serious citations because the resulting accident is usually gonna be like finger amputation, could be death. But and those all add up, right? So you could have one piece of machinery that you end up getting like 6 citations for because of all these different moving parts. And we're not even talking about the point of operations. We're just talking about the moving transmission parts.
Yeah.
So yeah, machine guarding is definitely a big thing. So, and that's usually the issue with like the manufacturing, um, trying to think the other issues that come up there would be, I think, something that you mentioned earlier about like with the silica, I think the health hazards are really hard for employers because, with the safety things like machinery, I mean, you can see the saw blade, if I touch that saw blade, I'll cut my finger off.
Yeah.
But with the health items like the silica or like the dust in the air, you do, and those hazards are cumulative, right? So it takes a long time, and people just don't realize that, or you can't see it. Like there's vapors in the air that could kill you, but you don't see them. And I think that's a hard part with the health side of things is that it's if you know if we can see it, we believe it. If we can't see it, then there's always like, well, I don't know. I don't see anything. I don't think it's really that big of a deal, kind of a thing. So,
A lot to be said about that one. That truly, if it's not in front of me and I can't touch it and feel it, it doesn't exist. And
yeah.
the reality of it is you're breathing in these silica particles for 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah.
And I'm working with a client right now, and again, another small mom and pop shop, probably 10 people.
Okay.
We're going over their silica program, and we haven't done air monitoring yet. That's the next phase, but just educating them and saying, hey, eventually you're going to have problems. These guys have been doing this for 10, 15 years. They may have problems now. They're just not, having many symptoms. And so, yeah, that's scary to me. So we got we got machine guarding, we got forklifts. Here's something that I'm you've probably seen it as well. Why are we focusing more on forklift training than HAZCOM training or lockout tagout or confined space, where they all have I've never dealt with a fatality or a major injury with a forklift, but I have with lockout tagout. I have with confined space or slips, trips, and falls, but yet the industry is so focused on forklift training. Maybe because it's a vehicle and it's similar to a car. I don't know. But it's like,
Yeah.
where does that come from? I mean, we got clients that only do forklift training, but I go, hey, you need lockout tagout training. Oh no, we're good. Or you know what I mean? It's like it doesn't have the same attention. What do you guys what do you think of that?
Yeah. I think, with the forklift thing is kind of interesting because I think with our regulation, we talk about how employees have to be certified, right?
Mhm.
And so, in order to be certified, what most employers do is that they send their employees to an offsite, you
Mm.
know, business that's what they do. They certify employees on forklifts. But the hard part is that with like hazard communication, there's nothing in our hazard communication regulation that says that you need to be certified or anything, right? It just says you have to be trained. And
Yes.
that can be really hard because a forklift for the most part is going to be like there's different styles of forklifts, but for the most part, this if you do like a sit down counterbalance, right? Forklift. The training for that is going to be pretty much the same. Like the controls might differ a little bit, but for the most part, they can do the same training for that for wherever the employee is coming from. No matter what type of business they are. But like hazard communication, though, that's going to be company specific, right? So you can send an employee out for like hazard communication training, but what are the chemicals that they're using at that employer may not be something that is talked about in that training for hazard communication, if that kind of makes sense. I think with forklift is a lot easier because it says you have to be certified. People know you have to be certified, and they do that. The other like right, lockout tagout is a really big one, right? That's
Yeah.
a huge thing. That causes a lot of fatalities every year, like improper lockout tagout. Um, but again, it's the employer's responsibility to do the training, and the half the time the employers don't even know how to access the regulation, so they don't even know what they're supposed to train on. They think they have trained on it,
Yeah.
but they don't know what the regulation says, right? So that's the hard part, is getting employers to understand what elements or what provisions of the standard they need to be training on.
Yeah.
So
And that's one of those topics where we see a JJ Keller video or
yeah.
and those are good. Those are well made. They do a really good job of going through the requirements. But when you ask the question, so what materials are you using? Oh, we're using, nitric acid. Do you know where the SDS is? I think they're over there on the wall.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
no,
then you go
exactly.
look at it and I go, do you know how to read this?
Hmm.
No, I don't
Uh,
understand.
you brought up a really good point. So you can buy like the videos, you can send somebody out for training, you can buy videos, all that kind of stuff. You can find stuff on YouTube to do the training,
Yeah.
but the employer needs to understand that they always need to augment that with site specific training. I mean, even with the forklift, right? You can send an employee out there to get certified, but whatever they got certified on, that forklift might differ a little bit than the forklift you have on site. Like maybe the one that they got certified on doesn't have a side shift, right? And yours has a side shift. So then there
Mhm.
would just be some very brief additional information like, hey, ours has a side shift. This is how we use it, that kind of stuff, right? Because you
Absolutely.
always want to make the training, most of the time, the training you're going to get from other, uh, third party vendors or whatever is going to be just general in nature. And
Mhm.
then you always need to augment that with your site specific training.
Yeah, that is like the most uh the biggest challenge I think overall that I see out there is just it's like a big hurdle to go over to get the client to say, yeah, I get it. I need to be site specific. And here's why. Because if
Mhm.
if you're using a lift that is very unique to what you're doing, and you can't go to Joe's training shop down the street, get a certificate and come back and all of a sudden you know how to use this equipment. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. I think that industry really needs to understand is it's the site specific requirements are for their own benefit,
Mhm.
and putting the effort and time into creating their own programs is key. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. All right, so we got that. We got forklifts. We got um HAZCOM and lockout tagout, and lockout tagout's a really big one, and machine guarding. What are some of the challenges you see with lockout tagout? Uh,
A lot of times they don't fully, there's a lot of times when they should be doing lockout tagout and instead they're like just hitting the stop button on the control panel, right? Like they stop the process and they go over and they unjam it or do whatever, but it's not truly locked out or tagged out, right? So I think just understanding the difference between like doing a full blown lockout tagout and then if you're going to use, there's an exception called the minor servicing exception that employers can use because like the work is integral, they're having to do it frequently throughout the work shift, um, and that you can do alternate methods, but those methods have to be just as effective as if you had locked it out or tagged it out.
yeah,
So it could be a situation where, if they do the minor servicing exception, maybe there's a key so they can like pause it and they can take that key out now. And there's no way for them to for it to be restarted unless that key gets put back in there and turned to on or whatever it is. But
yeah,
I think that's one issue is like not knowing how to lock out, tag out, and not realizing that anytime they go to an area of machinery, if there's a jam or something, that is technically supposed to be locked out, tagged out, I mean like shut down, right?
yeah.
And if you're not going to do that, making sure you have those other guards in place. The other issue too is that employers will have a lockout tagout policy, but then the supervisors aren't aware that they should be enforcing that, right? Like if you see people bypassing interlocks, like that needs to be stopped immediately. That happens a lot. A lot of our accidents that get investigated, oh no, that's why they've always done it. Yeah, we always just, we always just open, or like the interlocks are broken, right? Oh no, you can totally lift that up and it doesn't stop the machinery. So it's oh actually, and then the other thing too that people forget is that after you lock it out, you're supposed to try to restart it, right? So
Yes.
we've had situations where people, especially for like complex lines, right? Like you have processing lines or like a lumber mill or something like that. There's a lot of different moving parts, and you think that you've locked it out. You don't try to restart it. There was a fatality we had where somebody thought they had locked it out, but they'd only locked out like the first portion of the
Mhm.
equipment, and they actually ended up getting killed because the second portion wasn't locked out and it got turned on.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Isn't there a requirement for, say we have a power outage
mhm.
and we have all this machinery shuts down immediately, and everything stops. Then all of a sudden energy kicks back on and all the machines start again, is there a requirement for having some kind of a surge? Is it a shutdown, an automatic shutdown on the equipment?
Yeah, there is. I'm trying to think. Trying to think on that. There is a regulation that talks about that if it poses a hazard, if
Mhm.
there is a sudden power failure, when the power comes back on, it doesn't come back on, right?
Yeah.
But I don't, off the top of my head, I can't remember in what context that is. But we do, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? If you
Yeah.
have stuff that turns back on, it can seriously hurt somebody, then yeah, you want to make sure that that turns off. So
Yeah, we had a client that had a bunch of old equipment, some really old drill presses and things
mhm.
like that. And they were on quite often throughout most of the day. And then we one of the questions we had was, hey, if we had a power outage, do you have anything on there that would prevent it from restarting when the power comes back on? And they did on a couple items, and they ended up retrofitting them. So
Oh, good.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was something that we like, hey, this could really
Mhm.
it actually it did happen. It happened often.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some things that to consider for you know those power outages that we randomly have, especially in the summer coming up.
Yeah, no,
In
definitely.
California
Yeah.
and Northern California, we have the power outages coming if it gets really hot.
Mhm.
So we got machine guarding and other areas now. Now I've heard of we've had a few pretty nasty fatalities over the years, especially in well, at least in my area in Southern California. A few years ago we had they weren't my client, I just read it in the paper, and I thought, wow, I hope this is a wake-up call. And it was a guy working on some kind of shredding machine. I think it was in
Ew.
Gardena. Do you remember that one? Oh no, you're in Northern California, so you may not. You may have
Yeah.
heard about it, but it was in Gardena. It was a it was an aerospace company, and the guy, he was a fatality, and that really that was kind of eye opening for me because of
Yeah.
aerospace company. This was a major company, a really big company. I think they were third tier, big enough to where this sort of thing should be, covered, and they should have all the training, a lot of resources, and yet they still had a fatality, and that's just,
Yeah. I
I don't
mean,
want to disclose the name of the company now. Not the time and place, but yeah, these things are still happening.
yeah.
Still
I
happening.
mean, one thing to think about too, like in your IAPP, right, talks about that you're supposed to do a hazard assessment anytime there's like a new process, new operation, you get new equipment, new chemical comes into place. So what ends up happening is that, and I don't know what the circumstances are of that case you just, or
Yeah.
that fatality you just spoke about, but you get a new piece of equipment, it's the employer's job to do a hazard assessment. And basically it's like, if I was going to get injured, how would I get injured? And you work backwards from that, right? And you try to like safeguard that.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of employers, they think, oh, I just bought this, it should already come guarded.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. That's the problem. There's a lot of machinery that does not come guarded. I
Yeah.
remember when I was in enforcement, I had a case where I it was like a glazing, it's like a glass contractor, right? And the guy basically spent all day just cutting aluminum frames, right, for the windows.
Hmm.
And it was basically a miter saw, right? Just chop straight down. But this was an industrial one that they had purchased from, I don't know if it was France or if it was like Italy, from a different country. And basically the way it worked is that he would pull down and then the head would come down and the guard would swivel up and then he could cut it, right? But with most miter saws, when you bring it down, if you let go, it just bounces back up and the guard goes into place, right? So,
Yeah.
but this didn't have that. When he pulled it down, it wouldn't drop, right? It had the safety feature there, so it wouldn't drop down when you let go of the handle, right? But it would just stay there. So what ended up happening was that as he pulled it down, as he's cutting throughout the day, the saw blade's getting hot, and he has the lubricating, the coolant coming down on it, right? So instead of putting it all the way back up, he'd put it part way back up so that it engages the lubrication system to keep cooling the saw. And he grabbed a piece of metal and he brought it across and he cut his thumb off because the
Oh,
blade was exposed,
yeah.
right? So the thing was that the employer had never done a hazard assessment. And had they done a hazard assessment, they would have seen that this doesn't go back up. So what did they do to fix it? They modified the bracket on the back So then once you let go of that handle, it automatically would go up.
Oh, wow. Something so
But I
simple.
mean, but those are really hard for the employer to know, right? Like I get that, but it's always good for the employer. Always take a look at the piece of equipment and think about, if I wanted to hurt myself, how would I do it and what can I do to stop that?
Wow, that's some good feedback, because this is something that happens daily in
Yeah.
industry. Buying equipment, assuming, oh yeah, I just bought it from some place in Kentucky and it's in the States, so it should be compliant, when geez, just we can't assume that. We can't assume
Yeah.
that. Especially when we're doing, modifying equipment and doing things that you know, anyone's gonna make what you instruct them to, but they're not always gonna have the OSHA requirements in place. They may have some machine guarding, but it may not function properly.
Right. Yeah.
So you got to do a
Well,
site specific evaluation.
and then the other thing too is that you can also buy equipment and they have the safety guards, but it's
Mhm.
like the additional cost, right? So you get, maybe you have like a foot operated pedal, right, that you use for whatever, but it doesn't come with a guard to prevent unintentional operation, right? Like we have a regulation that talks about if you have a foot pedal, it has to have some sort of guard over it. So that way somebody doesn't accidentally step on it and it causes it to, cut somebody's finger off or whatever.
Wow.
But when you go to their website, they show you the pedal without the guard. But then if you go further in their website, you can buy one with the guard, right? But it's like that additional cost for the safety features, which, really for the manufacturer, they should just build that into the cost. That's, my opinion, obviously. But I think one that gets overlooked a lot is noise, right? Overexposure to noise with manufacturing, could be welding, it could be in ag. That gets overlooked a lot because,
Yeah.
and that's one of those health things where, again, it's like long term, right?
Mm.
But once you do the damage, it's permanent.
Yep.
So, and it's a hard one too, especially if you have operations where, they're not consistent, right? So
Mhm.
maybe it's like intermittent noise, but just for employers to understand that and just always encourage, hearing protection, or at least making sure hearing protection is always available, right?
So what are the steps we take to comply with this if we're over that 80? Is it 80 decibels for the action level?
So the action level is 85 decibels,
85?
right? So the action level is 85, which is like 50% of the permissible exposure limit, which is 90 decibels.
Got
So
it.
decibels is like exponential, right? So I mean the first thing is like you have somebody come in and just identify what areas you have noise.
Mhm.
So like, for myself, if I go into an employer and I like, wow, it's kind of noisy in here. Let's get an idea what these readings are. And then once we get an idea of those readings, you kind of take a look at the operation. And then, I will sometimes recommend, hey, you know what? I think that we should do some full shift noise dosimetry. I
Mhm.
come out, I hang the dosimeters on the employees for their 8-hour shift, their 10-hour shift, whatever it is. And then we get some idea what the exposure is, right? And then based on those exposures, you may need to implement a hearing conservation
Yeah.
program, right? Where you are making sure that employees are having annual audiograms, having their hearing tested, right? To make sure that they're not losing hearing. You have to make sure that they're trained, and you have to make sure that they have the hearing protection. And I definitely will recommend, just make a requirement. If they're going to be working in this area, you as the employer can just be like, anytime you're in this area, it doesn't matter if you're only in here for 2 hours, we want you to wear the hearing protection.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
because the thing to remember too is that, like, and I know that employers will feel overburdened by our regulations, and we have a lot of regulations. I get that. But our regulations are the bare minimum, right? The employer can always go above and beyond. And
Absolutely.
so that's what we usually recommend, is that make it easy instead of like worrying about who goes in there, who doesn't go in there, just blanket policy. Anytime you enter this area, hearing protection.
Mhm. Yeah, and then we want to look at, and some of the things that we're going to look at with this particular topic or company I was working with is engineering controls.
Yeah.
Because we
Mm-hmm.
found right away that, hey, if we just retrofitted or even upgraded some of the foaming and the various things around the cab, it would mitigate some of that sound.
Oh yeah, for the trucks, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were looking at that, and those are some things that, unfortunately, it costs money. We
Yeah.
got to spend a
Mm-hmm.
few bucks to prevent these kinds of long-term chronic exposures. You know, and that's just some of the things that we got to do versus a, you know, a guy in his mid-60s who definitely is going to have some hearing issues. You know,
Right.
we haven't even sent him to the clinic yet, and I guarantee there's going to be some issues with that, and we just want to get ahead of this. The
Yeah.
name of the game is being proactive and getting ahead of these sorts of things and doing these analysis.
And Jesse, you bring up a really good point, and I probably should have started with this, but like you'd mentioned, the hierarchy of controls, right? So you start at like, first of all, can you just like whatever the hazard is, can you just get rid of it,
Yeah.
right? Can you substitute it out? A lot of times you can't. And then you go to your engineering controls, right? Can you engineer it out? And then maybe you go to administrative controls, like can we do job rotation? And then finally is your PPE, right? And PPE is always the last line of defense
Absolutely.
because you are relying on the employee to wear the PPE. A lot of times it may not always be comfortable. They may forget it, they may lose it. They may think, oh, I'm just going to go in there for a couple of minutes. I don't really need it. Right. And so that's why you always want to start engineering controls. So one thing with the noise is that when you hit 90 decibels, right? If you're above 90 decibels, at that point, our regulation talks about how you're supposed to put in some sort of engineering or administrative controls, right? So depending on what it is, you need to do something. And, maybe you do that and it still doesn't bring the noise down below, down to 85 or whatever. But, you've done something and then you augment that with the hearing protection.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense.
Oh yeah, that makes total sense. To you and I, it makes total sense. But getting that communicated to industry, that's always the challenge. And then like we keep falling back to, if we can't touch it and feel it, it doesn't exist. And hearing, man, oh man, as we age, hearing becomes more of a challenge for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Really want to communicate the importance of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So hearing, I'm glad we touched on that one. So we have hearing. What are some other things? Let's go with a simple, like a simple one that we see quite often: slips, trips, and falls, or the ergonomics of just overall layout of some of the places that we visit.
Yeah, so that's interesting because the visits I've done, usually what's caused the employers. So one thing, I guess I got to take a step back here. So for us with Cal OSHA consultation, we have a high hazard employer program. So we send out letters, we get a list of employers whose X mods, which is their experience modification rates, and their X mods are above 125. So we send them out a letter basically stating, dear employer, you're on our high hazard employer list. And then we offer our services to go out there and to help them. So I go out there, and when I look at their like 300 logs, if they have to keep 300 logs, or maybe their lost run reports, you'll see a lot of the things are going to be like these weird like sprains or strains, right? These musculoskeletal injuries from either like awkward postures or repetitive motions or slips, trips, and falls.
Yeah.
But the irony of that is that like with Cal OSHA, I mean, we do have a kind of repetitive motion standard, but it's very weak. It's like in order to trigger that regulation, it's hard to meet the scope of it, right? And so it's one of those things where that is really, if those are the injuries you're having, it really is imperative that the employer invest some time and energy in trying to reduce those, because those are, when I was in enforcement, I saw a lot of fatalities, amputations, and then coming to consultation, I'm seeing the majority of the injuries are the musculoskeletal, flips, trips, and falls. But those are the ones that cost, employers a lot more money.
Yeah.
I saw a lost run report where somebody had a fleshy tip amputation, right? They just got like the very tip of their finger cut off, and it was like a $12,000 claim. And then they also had another one where a woman had like injured her upper back, lower neck, and it was like a $150,000 claim.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, that is usually what's causing a lot of problems for the employer. It may not be that machine guarding issue that caused the employer to lose or the employee to lose, his fingertip or whatever. But those are really hard because of slips, trips, and falls. That's really where, again, part of your IIPP is doing accident investigations, right? So if somebody slips, shouldn't it be part of the accident investigation is trying to determine what caused it, And a lot of times there may be more than one cause, and then taking a corrective action for each cause, right? So
Absolutely.
it could be a situation where if the floors are slippery, why is water being spilled? What is it that's causing it to be slippery? Do you maybe need to, put down some grading or put down some sort of epoxy with like the sand in that's gonna, create a better grip. So, but those are things that like Cal OSHA, we don't really have regulations on, I mean, we have some general ones, but not the specifics like we have with machine guarding and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's what you indicated. That's what I have seen when the last corporate job I had before I um started ROI was just that, where we were seeing a lot of ergonomic
Mm-hmm.
trips and falls were were ended up being our biggest claims. Whereas, we could manage our respirator training program. We knew exactly where it was easy to manage. But when it came to somebody going to their car in the evening or slipping in a puddle and
Mm-hmm.
that costing, $30,000, $40,000, that was the one. It's like, oh my goodness, how do we manage this? How do we
Yeah.
deal with this incident? And then we were seeing that in, strains and sprains and an aging workforce, and other various ergonomic issues throughout uh, within a large company is where we were seeing it. Lots of issues there that cost a lot of money. That was the
Yeah,
thing.
it
It
does.
cost so much money. Having somebody, you know, cut themselves and go get stitches. Okay, fine. We know that's it. That's where it ends. But then when we have somebody from accounting complaining of a sore wrist, and then we send them out to get treatment, and then they're in treatment for 6 months or whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's going to be way more than the standard cut or laceration. So focus. And how do you prevent that? Well, the industry is geared towards ergonomic workspaces, and they're doing a really good job of that.
Mhm.
But yet education is where I seem to find the gap.
Yeah. And I would say one of the it's probably I don't know if I'd say it's the simplest, but I think one of the easier things to do is if you as the employer, if you can get employee buy-in, right? So sometimes that can be really tough depending on who your employees are. But if you can get employee buy-in where they, hey, we want to make sure you guys have a safe workplace. If you see issues, let us know. Because a lot of times the supervisors don't know. Like maybe there's been a step on a stairway that's been broken for, a few months, but nobody ever said anything because it's not really that big of a deal. It's just slightly lower than the other ones or something.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
all those little things make a difference, right? And all those like near misses that happen are really an opportunity for the employer to like fix it before it becomes an actual accident. But I think that's and I think there's also the I don't know, kind of like the psychology of the employee, like not wanting to make a big deal about things, right? Like
Yeah.
they want to go and they want to do their job and they want to go home. They don't want to like voice a lot of opinions or maybe just want to kind of fly low under the radar. But if you have employees who, there are some employees who are really into health and safety, then you get them to be the ones like then go to that person. You don't want maybe you don't want to come to the boss, but then go to whoever you feel comfortable with and bring that up and let's get it addressed.
Awesome. Yes. I love that. And we're falling back to the IPP again, right? Going
Yeah.
back to communication,
Yeah.
keeping employees and employers accountable and working together as a team. And once we can establish this, then we can find, hey, there's that corner. It's a blind spot. I think we should put a half dome mirror in there. Oh yeah, I've been saying that for years, but did you tell anybody?
Yeah.
Did you tell the boss? No, he's too busy. That's not being responsible. So
Right.
that's really where and I'm not putting I'm going to put a lot of the responsibility on the employer. 100%. It's their business. They need to own it, literally. But we got to put some responsibility on the employee as well, and say, hey, you have a role in this too. You
Oh
need to
yeah, definitely.
speak up. And when you have an unhealthy work environment, they're out there. There's a lot more out there than I'd personally like to see, but there's a lot of them out there, and it's unfortunate. But I'm seeing less and less. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't see the drill sergeant boss as often as I used to. I still see it, not as often though.
That's good.
You know, and I'm sure you can attest to that in some of the businesses you've been in. It's still out there, but we see people at least being open to, you know, to hey, we really want to see the employees be happy and enjoy their working environment. And when somebody gets hurt or something, a near miss occurs, it that doesn't help. It does bring down the culture of the workplace. So definitely looking at ergonomics, looking at slip, strips, and falls. Now, what about we kind of touched on this, but just chemicals in general, like dealing with, you know, the majority of our clients, it's acetone, it's some kind of solvent, maybe it's a can of, you know, lubricant or nothing really that bad. Every
Mhm.
now and then we'll get a client that has nitric acid, caustic soda. They're going into confined spaces and they're cleaning out mixing tanks. And those are the ones that we really want to camp out on and teach them proper HAZCOM training, proper chemical handling, labs. We do have some
Mhm.
labs. So talk a little bit about HAZCOM and that program and why it's important to have an effective training program with dealing with chemicals and you know, spills, exposure, chronic, acute, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, hazard communication is interesting because I think, you know, kind of like you mentioned, you have like this full spectrum. So you have like the people who are using maybe for the most part consumer products, right? Like you can just go
Yeah.
down to your Home Depot, your Lowe's, and like pick up whatever it is that you need, all the way to the extreme of like a, you know, chemical processing plant or whatever. But I think what the employer, well, all employers basically just need to understand any chemicals that the employees may be handling or could be exposed to, there needs to be some sort of communication on that hazard, right? On that hazardous chemical. So when you look at our regulation, it talks about the different things, you know, that they're supposed to be trained on. So the one thing for sure, the employer or the employee should at least be trained on. They should know what a safety data sheet is, right? If they want more information on this chemical, they should have an idea of what a safety data sheet is, where they can go to find one. They need to have an idea of like, is there any sort of special personal protective equipment that they need? You know, if they're going to be using this corrosive material, then they need to make sure that they're wearing, you know, eyewear, gloves, whatever it is. And then I think, you know, chemicals are hard, right? Because it's one of those things where people are like, I don't know anything about chemicals. Like I don't know the difference between like an acetone and an isopropanol or whatever it is, right? Chemicals can be tough. You start saying chemicals in people's or eyes, they kind of just glaze over, right? So you just want to keep it simple,
Yeah.
right? So for the people who are doing the confined space, usually those people are going to be much more highly trained than the person who may be, you
Mhm.
know, doing something at the grocery store, right? Some sort of sanitation operation at the grocery store, right? But the training has to still be the same.
Mhm.
It's just like how in depth you cover it and what those hazards are. But I mean, I don't know if I did a very good job of answering your question. It's one of those things where it's all based on the circumstances, right? It's all
Yeah.
based on what those circumstances are. So
Yeah, and then like you said, you got a confined space entry. That level, the training will be the same, but the level of understanding needs to be at a much greater level in terms of, hey,
right.
what are the symptoms
Mm-hmm.
of exposure to isopropyl alcohol or whatever? You know, what do we do if if the alarm goes off, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, how do we manage that situation or whatever else may occur. And it truly is. And we're going to, you know, the more we dig into this, the more we're going to realize, I think, is every single company, every single incident or process has to be site specific and addressed to that
Yeah,
level. There's
it
no,
really does. You're right.
yeah, there's not like, oh yeah, here, just watch this nitric acid video. And I tried it too. I tried it when I was in the refining business. You know, I bought the nitric acid videos because we used a lot of it. We got a free one from the
Mhm.
vendor, and we would watch it. Go, yeah, this is okay. You know, okay. Well, what do I do if we do it in this situation? And it really, it was helpful.
Hmm.
It wasn't the end all of our training, and it truly is. It truly is something that we need to address specifically. I'm a big fan of the IIPP. I really think, you go to Utah, you go to Nevada, Arizona, they don't have IIPPs. Nevada has something similar, but nothing like an IIPP, and it really does a good job of giving tools to the employer and employees to use within, if it's done right. The key is if it's done right.
Hmm.
So I definitely think that is an area we can definitely focus on. So we got HASCOM, and I think we've covered a lot of the major things that employers need to look out within their organization. Working at heights is another one, confined spaces is another one, but those are more on a, we want to focus more on that in maybe another interview later. We can focus, like, confined spaces is, to me, we do a lot of wastewater treatment plants.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I would say 9 out of 10 are lucky, to be honest with you, are really lucky, because
Hmm.
their programs are just, decades old, is what
Hmm.
we're seeing, decades old. And they, at one time, they had a great program, but retirement and people moving on is what kills programs. And
No, that's true.
see consistency with these people. There's I say 9 out of 10, I'm probably exaggerating. It's probably more like 7 out of 10. that
But I think that you speak to the truth, right? Like that institutional knowledge is lost when
Yeah.
that person who's been with, the county, the city, whatever, for 30 plus years and knows all the ins and outs, right? That's something else to make sure that the next line of people get trained on that. I think with training, if you can get the employees to understand why, like why this is important,
Mhm.
when they understand the why, I think people are more likely to do things, right? Like I know for myself, I am, right. Like if I understand, like, well, like this is dumb. Why do I have to do this? And then you explain the why to me, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I guess it's not as dumb as I thought. No, that makes sense. No, okay, I'll do it. That kind of stuff. So
It totally does. It really, and doing it at the level which would get them enrolled in it, like understanding this is why you need to do this. It's important that you do this because this could potentially happen. Oh, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never had that problem. Well, it just takes one time.
yeah,
The one
yeah,
the one time, I go into machine shop, I absolutely look at everybody's fingers,
yeah,
because that's the guy I want to talk to, because he knows what's happening. I guarantee he's probably going to be the safest guy there now, because
yeah.
he paid the price.
Mhm.
I did some training years ago at a construction site, and one of the guys who was like, if you ever did, we I don't like doing outside tailgate training because it's just outside, the elements are there, you got to talk louder.
Mhm.
But this one guy was in front of me, and I can tell he had a glass eye. And I was like, interesting. So when I got to the personal protection equipment part, and I started to get into the eye safety glasses, he volunteered. I want to tell my story, and he told his story. And he was probably, closer to 50, but there was a lot of youngsters in the group, and I think he had their attention.
Oh
And he
yeah,
explained how the nail gun took his eye out, and I was like,
yeah.
wow.
That happened to my uncle. He was my dad was a general contractor for years, and my uncle worked as a carpenter, and he had a nail gun that went into his eye.
Whoops.
Yeah, he didn't have a glass eye, and his eye was just he lost partial vision in that eye, but he was able to keep his eye. But yeah, so I mean, I think one thing employers can do, and this I think is probably something that would be a topic for another time. But like, you can actually go onto OSHA's website, and they have a database, right? And they have a whole bunch of different like stats that you can look at. So the two things I always bring to the employer is I bring the frequently cited, so whatever the most frequently cited regulations were for the prior fiscal year. And
Mhm.
it's too bad because they only do the previous fiscal year. So like right now, if you were to go there, it would be from September of 2021 through October of 2022, right?
Yeah.
But you basically put in the industry, right? Whatever the industry code is, like your 6-digit number.
Yeah.
And you can see like okay, so for all the United States, there were, for I should say, I'm sorry, for Fed OSHA, there was, 130 inspections and 2,000 citations. The top 10 are, IIPP. Maybe it's not reporting a serious injury. Could be hazard communication, right? So the employer can see that and think, oh, so this is what's being cited for our industry. So we should definitely tighten up on those things. And then the other thing I bring to them is what the accident investigations are. And what those are is because so like Cal OSHA, we're a state plan, right? Because we run our own version of OSHA. All of the state plans are required to basically upload all this information into Fed OSHA's database. So when you go to the accident details, it basically is, kind of the tip of the iceberg, but it's, all of the injuries, serious accidents that got reported, that got assigned and investigated, and they got uploaded to it, right? So then you can, again, search by industry, and you can see all the different types of accidents have occurred. And then you can focus on that. So for instance, like manufacturing, there will be a lot of amputations. There may be some fatalities. But I tell employers, use that as a training tool, because again, I think if you can speak to a real life situation, because like you mentioned earlier, the guy's like, I've been doing this for 20 years. This has never happened. They just have a very small, visual spectrum. It is a very small view, right?
Yeah.
But then if you widen that view and be like, yeah, you know what, it has not happened to you in 20 years, but here's 17 different instances where in the past 20 years it has happened, And I think to just bring that to people's attention, that right there can sometimes kind of switch that, maybe the opinion of that person.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. That is something that I have used that resource over the years, and it is very valuable. It does kind of wake one up from their slumber of what I like to call the zombie zone when they're at work. Just show up, punch in, and then go to the job site or workstation and just kind of basically check out, but not, I see that a lot in manufacturing. And, I get it. It's just, that's what gets them through the day. And in some cases you win, some cases you lose. It just, you're taking that gamble. It's a risk. All right. So we've covered some pretty significant topics, and I really, really, really appreciate your feedback and your approach to. I think it's great. It's going to be very valuable to those who are able to watch this. But I definitely can see more conversations happening with more specific topics. And so that's something that I would invite you to do if you're willing, in the future, because I think there's so much here. And this is, it's one thing to read about an OSHA standard and know it, but really understanding it and applying it is something that's basically what our jobs are, right? We want to help apply, what it says, how we do it, and what are some of the challenges in doing that. Putting in a HAZCOM program is easy. Training on it is easy. Managing it the day-to-day is not, because there's going to be challenges that come up. There's going to be a curveball thrown at you. We see that all the time. Well, what do we do about this situation? What do we do about the product that we only deal with once a year? I get that a lot. It's like, oh, goodness. Well, you train on it. you gotta deal. Well, we'll get rid of that. And then I know they won't, because the money's there. I have a client that does blending for customers, and they have this really nasty stuff. Every year they do it, and they say, oh, we won't do it anymore. Well, when September comes around and they ask you to do it, are you going to really tell them no? Really?
Yeah. I mean, part of your hazard communication, right, talks about how you handle non-routine tasks. I would consider that to be a non-routine task. So what are their procedures for that? Because they should have procedures for that.
Exactly. So identifying that and mitigating it and having a process in place. So those are the things that we definitely want to support industry in, and giving them the tools to do that. So what are some things that we can do, ahead of time to address these issues and do it effectively, and really, really get proactive in this approach? What is some advice you can give small businesses?
I would, I think a good place to start would be with their workers' comp carrier, right? So a lot of times the worker comp carriers, they'll have with it, if it's a broker, they can come out and do an audit, right? And that might be a good starting point. I think resources, they can reach out to consultants, right? They can reach out to Cal OSHA. But I think the first part is just like trying to figure out, and it's hard, right? But like, trying to figure out what it is that they think they need to work on, which they may not even know, which is sometimes why having somebody come out to do, with fresh eyes, kind of do the walkthrough. I mean, I'm sure you probably have like thousands of stories, right? Of like you going out, you inspecting a place, and them saying, "Oh my gosh, I have been here for 15 years and have walked by that every single day, and I've never noticed it." But as soon as you pointed out, yeah, that's a hazard. I don't know why I didn't notice that, because you just get used to your surroundings. You get. So yeah, so that would be definitely one thing I would recommend.
You don't know what you don't know, and then when you are exposed to whatever it is, it's like a dock.
Yeah.
Like I've seen docks, shipping docks, like in Long Beach. They were
Mhm.
made, to be compliant back in the day. And then when you have a 5-foot shipping dock drop off, well, you need to put some, railing in or something.
Yeah.
And those are the easy ones. Those are the low-lying fruit. There's other
Mhm.
things that especially with machine guarding, that's just wow, that can go on forever. So
Yeah, machine guarding's hard. It's definitely very complex.
very difficult to deal with. And I don't know. I obviously when I have a guy that I use that I get referred to often, and he's a very specific expert with machine guarding. Published guy. He's written papers on it.
Mhm.
Trust his experience. But yeah, but we definitely want to work together and help save lives. Every time I look at the OSHA landing page, I see how many fatalities there were for, I think, over 6,000 in 2021, was it? You know,
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to.
significant losses that can all be prevented. So we want to work together on that.